to YANA's town hall. It's called Addiction Recovery, Healing Through Compassion and Community. I'm Rachel Littman, class of 1991, Saybrook College, YANA's executive director. So it is no secret that many people in our country and around the world are dealing with addiction or the circumstances that lead to addiction, and that's either personally or through someone they know. And the process of recovery can be challenging, sometimes elusive, due to access to resources, stigma, and even just the recognition and acknowledgement of the kinds of thought patterns and behavior, contributing factors that are all indicative of some kind of addiction. So tonight we're speaking with representatives from two different nonprofits that focus on addiction treatment and recovery. And we're going to be hearing about their approaches, the challenges, and their successes. So our speakers this evening are Rabbi Iggy Gurin-Malous, if you want to wave, CEO of the Teshuva Center in New York City, and Dan McDermott, class of 76. Dan, welcome. Executive Director of Florida Lawyers Assistance. And I do want to also thank and welcome Vivian Hexter, class of 82, who's the Chief Operating Officer of Teshuva Center, who brought in Rabbi Iggy, and to Ken Inadomi, our founder, who helped bring in Dan. So thank you, everyone. Gentlemen, welcome. For those in the audience, we did want to try a little poll just to get a sense, and you're welcome to do this anonymously. Very quick questions. Kind of what brings you to us this evening? If you don't mind answering the questions, that'd be terrific. And again, I don't know if my panelists can see the answers coming in. No. Okay, so the first question is, are you or someone you know dealing with addiction? That's just a yes or a no. These are, and it's about 67% no, and about a third, obviously 2/3 no, 1/3 yes. And the second question is, do you work or volunteer with an addiction recovery service organization? The majority do not, and let's see, a few do. So a good variety. Looks like everybody answered. Okay, all right, so good. So thank you. And we probably should have another question generally about, I think I just shared the results. Hopefully that popped up for everyone. Excellent. Good, okay, well, that's just it. This is just a good, hopefully will help us get a better sense. Gentlemen, welcome. Let's start first with your organizations, and Rabbi Iggy, if we could start with you about the Teshuva Center. And I understand it comes out of Beit Teshuva in Los Angeles, where you may be sitting in Los Angeles now. And I have to start with a name, if you don't mind. Many of us, particularly if you're Jewish, understand Teshuva as being really repentance. Which is sort of the area, the focus during the Jewish high holidays between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So when I saw the name of your organization, I was like, boy, that's not very encouraging. But my understanding of the Hebrew word is that you really adopt the other literal meaning of return. So could you elaborate on this and then also tell us a little bit about the Teshuva Center?
Of course, and thank you for having me. And it's really an honor to be on the panel with Dan, absolutely. And really an honor to speak at YANA. Thank you. So, yeah, so interestingly enough, the word tshuva in Hebrew has 3 different meanings. For those people who don't know, Hebrew is a language based around a root system. That is, sort of different words come with different roots, so words are related to one another in sorts of different ways. And tshuva means 3 things. So one, as you said, the classic one is repentance. The tshuva really means or can be translated into repentance. The other 2, the second one you said, which is tshuva, is also a response. So if you ask a question in Hebrew, it's she'ela. If you get a response, an answer, it's tshuva. So that's the second meaning of tshuva. And the third one, as you said, is to return to a higher self, to return home, to return to a place of more meaning, whatever that is. And therefore, right, a lot of the times for people who are returning to a practice of more meaning, more observance, more spirituality, whatever it is for each person, that process becomes to return, lachzor, to return b'tshuva. So in that nexus of repent, response, and return, Teshuva Center really was born. That is sort of that we really think about these three elements as the three main parts that are in fact very encouraging and inspiring. Repent means that you have something in your life, in your past, that you want to change, something that perhaps you feel shame and guilt over, something you feel that you've affected people in a way that perhaps you would have rather affected them in a different way than what you did, right? That's the repentance part, to feel like, you know what, I need to change, I need to do something better, right? And that is the classical, if you said high holidays, but also the classical repentance, I think, for most spiritual practices. And the other two are the way that we do it. And that is sort of like, are you seeking an answer, right? Are you seeking an answer to your life, to your sense of that hole in your soul, the sense of mattering to the world, connection, which we'll talk a lot about, right? That is, are you seeking response to the question that life asks, right? A lot of people see themselves as seekers. And then lastly, of course, the return, because when we are able to acknowledge our part in what we've done, the repentance, when we're able to say like, you know what, I want to seek an answer. I don't want to just like sit here and wallow in shame and guilt or anything else, or continue the behavior. That's where I can be back to where I am my higher self. I'm a version of myself I can be proud of. And the Teshuva Center is an organization that sort of like, because of COVID, went all online, but we're working towards a residential component of what we do, which is an intentional spiritual community, a place where people can come, and we have groups and we have meetings and we have programs for people who are seeking a community in a place where they can really engage with those questions we just said about repentance, about soul, about spirituality. That's not about religion, right? It's something that allows people to connect to other people who want to become better and to take their past and not be ashamed and guilt of it, but to use this past to grow better into their future.
Excellent. And just a little bit, are you guys opened? What brought you to New York to start this thing, right? Because this is a kind of a new organization, right, here, or at least on the East Coast.
Correct. So yeah. So as you said, the DNA of our work comes from an organization in Los Angeles called Teshuva, which has been around for over 30 years, which is a treatment center, a residential treatment center in Los Angeles that marries spirituality, the 12-step program, AA, of course, and all the other sort of like meanings that are adjacent to that, and really sort of blends in a way to sort of to help people in a long-term recovery, 6 to 9 months recovery. I was the director of spiritual counseling there, and then life circumstances, family has brought me to New York, and I wanted to continue this most incredible and the most rewarding work I've ever done in my life. So I started the Teshuva Center, and we were well on our way to become residential, and then, you know, the world had a different path they needed to take around sort of COVID. But you know, it also has become this amazing blessing for us because we went online, and now our entire programming can be found online, and we have drop-in groups. Like I said, we have one-on-ones. We have all sorts of different ways to support people who are seeking recovery from a personal space and a communal space within us. But our plan is hopefully within a year and a half to go back to sort of the residential model. But at the moment we're all online, and we have people coming in from Kuwait to New Zealand to right down the street in New York.
Yeah, I was just going to say, who are your clients and the families? Is it just New York City? It sounds like no.
No, at this moment, sort of like we have really people from all over. We have people from the UK, we have people from New Zealand, from Kuwait, from Israel, from Miami, from Chicago, and from New York, of course, as well. But yeah, and what we're doing, I think like most organizations thinking about sort of the next steps in the hybrid model, come April, we're going to start a in-person programming in New York. So that will be for a lot of people within New York or sort of the New York area, which will be a 1 day a week programming that we're starting as we move towards more of a full programming. But yeah, at the moment we have people from literally everywhere.
So how many people are you serving right now out of the New York Teshuva Center?
So, you know, those numbers are interesting. We're in the thousands, right? So like we have, right, okay. We have sort of like, right, we have podcasts that go out, right? Those sort of like those numbers are around the 20,000. We have, you know, small groups that are around 7 people, right? So we have a really of people that that show up to programming throughout. So, but in the last few years, yes, thousands of people have been part of our circles and how we affect people and families around them. Yes.
Okay, great. We're going to come back to some more about the work and the approach and stuff. Dave, I have to turn to you now. You're in Florida with the Florida Lawyers Assistance organization. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of that, why and how it was formed, what some of the formalities and the client base that you work with?
Sure, glad to do that, Rachel, and good to be with you this evening. And Rabbi Iggy, great to share the panel with you. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank all of you who joined us from across the country. Florida Lawyers Assistance, as the name suggests, really is rooted in recovery in the legal profession. And FLA, as we call ourselves, the acronym for Florida Lawyers Assistance, was actually organized in 1986, which incidentally was the year that I got sober myself. But while I was up in the DC area getting sober, Florida was putting together this nonprofit, independent nonprofit, to deal with what had become a recognized situation as far as disease and addiction goes. And really, to start at the beginning, Rachel, back in, I think it was 1956, the American Medical Association recognized alcoholism as a disease for the first time. Prior to that, AA was organized itself. Alcoholics Anonymous, which Rabbi Iggy had referred to, was organized in the 1930s. So there was an evolving understanding of that disease. Let's just talk about alcoholism for a while. And the AMA classified it as a disease itself in the mid-50s. Prior to that, the prevailing view was that it was a character defect, it was a moral failing, it was a lack of personal discipline. Degenerates and incorrigibles were the ones who wouldn't stop drinking. So that was a big term. So that happened in the mid-50s. It wasn't until the mid-1970s that the legal world started to kind of catch up with the AMA. And across the states, various state Supreme Courts, and in the case of Florida, the Florida Supreme Court in 1986 ruled that they recognized the disease concept of alcoholism. Having done that in the mid-70s, by the mid-80s, as they continued to work with the Florida bar and rule on cases that involved really attorney behavior, attorney disciplinary matters, that oftentimes the common theme was alcohol abuse or later drug abuse of some sort that led to poor decision-making in the representation of clients. As they saw these patterns develop and as they saw that, we're now talking about a disease and not a moral defect, they said, we need to do something to provide the resource for lawyers to seek and get help before the calamity happens. You don't have to wait until it's a disciplinary case where already they've made the mistake and already they're up before the grievance commission and the Florida bar for discipline. Let's get to them early and see, based on what we know, if we can provide the sort of assistance that preempts the worst case scenario, both personally and for their clients. So that's how Florida Lawyers Assistance was begun. And we really create a structure of recovery. And so we have that, and we also have a very vibrant outreach and education program, because as Rabbi Iggy mentioned, stigma is still a huge part of this work. And you find it especially complicated when you're dealing in the professions, because when you're a lawyer or a doctor, you are the problem solver. People come to you with their problems, so they don't want to know about you. You don't want to ever suggest that you have a vulnerability or a problem. Now, denial of that sort is just inherent in the disease of alcoholism. I mean, it's a disease and it's an addiction. And so one voice tells you you're sick. The other voice says, really? No, you aren't. You don't have to do anything for this, and that's the struggle. So, we do a lot of education, and I give you some numbers about that. I'd say last year, our education, our live outreach, meaning the people who are on live Zooms or in the rooms with us, we reached 5,000 Florida judges, lawyers, law students, and paralegals. So we do continuous education on mental health issues, on substance use. And over the years, from '86 to now, our mandate has broadened from just alcoholism and drug addiction to mental health issues. And that's an equally important part of our work. So we do the education piece, and you hope to attract people to come to us voluntarily. I will tell you that among our active under recovery contract cases, a very small number are truly voluntary approaches. There are people who come to us knowing that their behavior is going to come to the attention of the Florida bar and eventually get to us, and they can visit us first, and we welcome that. We welcome the earliest opportunity we can to be involved. But I'll tell you how it's set up in that way. As a requirement for practicing law and being a member of the bar in Florida, and there are over 100,000 members, and it's a mandatory bar in Florida. If you are convicted of a misdemeanor, you have to report that to the Florida bar within a number of days of the resolution of the criminal case. If you are charged with a felony, you don't wait till the criminal charge is disposed of. You have to report that immediately. The bar wants to know what they're dealing with in terms of the behavior of their membership, right? And so what happens is when lawyers get arrested for a drunk driving charge or a drug possession or something like that, or it could be client complaint, we know eventually they're going to... Right. We know eventually they're going to come to us. And then what we do is put them into a structure that involves weekly recovery meetings, weekly support group meetings that we sponsor that put them together with other similarly situated folks, other lawyers, that we ask them to do the 12-step meetings and so forth. And there's an accountability feature. They have a monitor who's a volunteer and alum of our program who they check in with every month and report on the meetings they're attending. And there's a requirement to be clean and sober, because when we're dealing with behavior that involves substance use, the only long-term solution is to eliminate that, if you can, to clean up. And it takes years, actually, to really kind of develop a successful recovery practice, we think. So our contracts, when they come under contract, sometimes last, some are 1 year, but most are 2 to 5 years. And we monitor how they do every month. We test them up to 15 times a year.
Right.
And in a sense,
let me pause here, because I'm curious, because I didn't get this level of detail with Iggy. I mean, what's the sort of length of involvement? I assume people are coming to you voluntarily, or do you take referrals from other kinds of institutions or government agencies?
What are you asking? Are you asking me or Dan?
You, Iggy, sorry. Yes, Rabbi. Yes, you. I was just curious, just in kind of comparison, we can kind of get a sense of the people, how long are people with your systems or your services?
So the program is 6 to 9 months. What we do is try and overhaul their life, right? So I try to deal with not just the addiction, but with the reason for the addiction in the first place, right? So like there's medical ways to sort of to sort of stop the addictive behavior of alcohol or drugs, whether the detox, but the question is, why were people using in the first place, and how to make sure that if they stop using, we find a place for them to use all their time and energy that they've used for their addiction into what they're doing. And for a lot of people, as Dan mentioned as well, for a lot of people, it's going back to basics. For a lot of people, is really trying to figure out, how am I feeling the way am I feeling? Why was I using in the first place? What was it trying to hide? Why was I using it in those moments? How can I live feeling with the feelings that I have around this? How do I deal with the shame and the guilt? How do I make amends? Right? So people are with us to try and gain tools. And some of them, again, in the residential part, it's also from reorganizing one CV down to sort of thinking about what are the things that make you you, part of the work that sort of we do is trying to make sure that people get a chance to ask the really deep questions that all of us really want from our life, which is, what makes me me? What is, right? I'm a rabbi in that sense, and I talk about the soul, right? Although some people may use other words for it, but what makes you unique, right? You are unique. Every single person who's sitting here on the panel in general, right, is a unique phenomenon. Right. And we've spoke about before that sort of you can think about it as God-given soul, or if you really want to go into sort of more, let's say, sort of genetics, right? You have to think that in order for you to sit at your seat right now, for the past 400 years, over 4,000 people had to make decisions, right? Where to live, what to eat, who to have sex with, who to go with, who get married, right? All these things that boils down, right? Because you have two parents and their parents and their parent, right? So those 4,000 people had to make those decisions for you to be there. So all those decisions so that you, this unique phenomena, can live in this thing. So now the question is, how do we honor that uniqueness? Because for a lot of people, and I think Dan, so like, would agree with this, right? The addiction comes as a way to hide the sense that I don't matter. Something's wrong with me. I'm broken somehow, right? That somehow, some way I need to either harm myself or try and avoid those feelings. And part of the very basic nature of the work that we do, again, in this sort of 6 to 9 months, is to sort of see how do I make sure to come back to a very simple element, which is you matter. You matter.
That's beautiful.
And when we can go back to that, right? When we can hold down to that, then if all your decisions, right? If all your decisions in life came from that little 2 words, that you matter, how do you honor that on a daily basis becomes not just the, I'm not a drunk anymore, I'm not a heroin addict anymore, but how am I moving from sobriety, from being sober and clean, to living in recovery, right? To using it as a way to actually move forward.
So let me bring it back to Dan. I mean, are you able to get into that, or is most of the time trying to get people to comply with whatever the orders are from the courts? Or
well, good question. We actually, what we have to do is create the structure within which everything Rabbi Iggy described happens, right? So that's why we prescribe, because if you think of it, if Florida Lawyers Assistance wasn't here, lawyers who say got a drunk driving arrest or whatever would be left to their own devices as to figure out what they should do. Maybe there's going to be another one. Maybe there's going to be 2 more. But we create a structure that says, let's pause. The behavior is problematic enough. Here's what we want you to do, and they do, and that exposes them to the 12-step meetings, the spiritual recovery. And incidentally, I will say we're non-denominational, we're non-sectarian, we're entirely secular, but recovery at root is a spiritual exercise. And there's just no escaping that. I think those who struggle and have a difficult time finding it are the ones who most resist the notion of the spiritual basis for recovery. But we have in our group, so having set up the structure, Rachel, we have lawyers who are living in residential facilities like Rabbi Iggy is going to start. We have them in group homes now, in sober homes. We encourage, but we don't. Yeah,
you have partners with different kinds of services that you don't necessarily have in house, but you're providing all the connections. Got it.
Right, and it depends on the individual circumstance. There can be devastation that has preceded their engagement with us, and we help them get to the place for now that is going to be the best option for them. And all of those recovery things, all of those recovery experiences and the insights and the personal growth that we're talking about all come as a result of the architecture that we put in place that builds the structure that they come into and would not frankly be there otherwise. So we try to create the shot for them to get recovery. There are some who can say forever, hey, it was one bad night, I did, it was a fluke that I got arrested. Most of our participants say, you know what, this is something I couldn't handle on my own, and I now realize what I was dealing with in my life, and I'm in a totally different place. And that's what we're hoping to offer.
So, Rabbi Iggy, do people often come to you and what are the circumstances under which they might come to Teshuva? Sounds like for Dan, a large majority, something's already happened and they've been referred over. What about in your case?
So we have, it's funny, we have an array. We have a lot of those as well, right? We have a lot of those where we're that last house on the block, right? They, what we call in AA, what have hit rock bottom, right? And they need help, right? So we have people who've tried the shorthand programs, right? The 30 days here, the 60 days there, the insurance model things, they've tried this. And that doesn't stick, or that doesn't work. And then we have people who are either in the pre-contemplative mode, or people who really want to enhance their recovery, people who've been in recovery, but it's not sort of, it's lost its luster, or it's not sticking. And we have people who just, and this is true for a lot of people, not just in addiction, but really in recovery. And I guess it's an important point to say that I believe that sort of you don't have to be an addict to be in recovery. I mean, we're talking about addicts primarily, but every one of us can be in recovery. I had an old mentor, Harriet Rosetta, who's actually sort of like, she was a little harsher about this. And she used to say, you either are in recovery or you're in denial. That is the sort of that recovery, the tools are the same, because what a lot of the people that we deal with have lost their ability to make meaning. They've lost their ability to actually find meaning in what they're going through. And the pain of existence, the human condition, has become too much. And part of, you know, in I'm sure we'll get to it, of things and stuff that I get frustrated with the Western world sometimes, is this question of why do we pathologize the human condition? Why do we constantly create a space where there's a pill? If you're too happy, there's a pill for that. If you're too sad, there's a pill for that. Why do we put the pressure on teenagers, on lawyers to perform to things without saying like, oh, this hurts, or I don't know how I feel about this? Why do we constantly put the pressure to perform without allowing people to say that they're allowed to rest, for example, without needing to earn to rest? That the right to rest is a God-given right. You know, one of the things that is very interesting, and I want to really pick up on something that Dan said, right? That spirituality, a lot of people hear spirituality, or they'll see Rabbi on my name and they're like, oh, but I'm not religious, or I hate religion, or religion is traumatic, or whatever. And it's really important for me, especially as somebody who is sort of in the world of theology, to say that spirituality is the core element. Religion is a way towards spirituality, but not the way towards spirituality. And we as well are non-sectarian, non-denominational in the way that we approach things. Yes, I'm a rabbi, and my view is a Jewish sort of like old ancient view of this, but we have, you know, we have 40% of the people we have are not Jewish at all. And in that sense, it's important, because I think that if we're looking at that role of recovery and spirituality, we're doing something that Dan was mentioning before as well, which is that to break what we call break the shanda, right? Break the stigma. That, right? If all of us can be in recovery, and if all of us have things that we can work on, and if all of us can learn, right? Then it's not shame, it's not guilt, it's not, as we said, a failure of character or failure of moral character, but it is something that we're dealing with, right? Who of us, especially in the pandemic, who of us have not shopped to feel better, eat to feel better, right? Taking a drink when we shouldn't have, right? Sort of engaged in behavior that did not really mesh with our higher value, but we did it because we were feeling something and we wanted to avoid that feeling. So I'm not saying that's addiction, but that is the same feeling. And if you make that extreme, then you get addiction. But all of us should be able to relate to the struggle that all of us are going through around, why am I here? What makes meaning for me? And how can I better my actions and my behaviors to live a more meaningful, integrated whole life? And that for me is recovery.
Got it. So Dan, working with, you know, the legal profession, as you noted, it's kind of it's a specific type, you know, maybe self-selected, and it's obviously a regulated profession. You know, can you get, I mean, there's always this like, you know, leave your work at home. I remember when I was a lawyer, like nobody cared like what you were doing on the weekend, or that you had a kid to pick up, like that just wasn't part of it. Now maybe things have changed over 20 years, but what are some of the things that are kind of feeding into this, and what's working for people, and can they do that and still be, you know, high pressure lawyers and judges and things like that?
No, it feeds in from all sorts of places, Rachel. I would say I don't have the actual statistics, but there are studies out there that show that the incidence rate of, say, alcoholism or drug addiction or depression, mental health clinical concerns among the legal profession is 30%, 40% higher than among the general population. Same thing with the medical profession. But I think, and so you described kind of one of the fundamental issues. Being a lawyer is a highly pressurized, it's a competitive, it's adversarial in a lot of ways. There's a lot at stake. You're handling someone's, life interests in one way or another. And it's a grind, honestly, you were there, I was there. It's a grind. And so that all leads to there's small t trauma, as we call it, kind of compassion fatigue, the daily hits that you take, the little nicks. It's not the slit throat, it's the little nicks that add up to, the same result in terms of injury, right? And there, I think Rabbi Iggy pointed out, we're in some ways we're taught to overlook that stuff, to minimize it, to find a pill for it. But the reality is that what we spend a lot of our time now, Rachel, especially in these last 2 years doing, we offer a support group meeting every noon hour of the weekday, just devoted to handling stress in the time of COVID. And we end up, one day is for judges, one day is for lawyers, one day is for paralegals, one day is for law students, and the fifth day is for working mother lawyers, who we find have their own unique set of problems in terms of the work-life balance. The law firm doesn't care, your client doesn't care when you have to pick up your daughter from soccer, you got a job to do. And how do you do that? Those have all been exacerbated in the pandemic, where people are working from home, where there is no literal separation. And, that has added a great deal of stress to people's lives. And our solution ultimately, is that you have to get to the basics. You have to do something in terms of a spiritual, exercise every day. You have to take care of your physical well-being. You have to interact with others in a meaningful way, turn off the laptop, put down the phone, engage, that kind of stuff, because, there's no magic bullet to it. It's doing what we all know, we've heard for so long, that actually works. Lawyers probably have a greater tendency to endorse concepts in theory than to engage in them in practice. We can oh yeah, that's right, I should go to the gym, and I should take a walk with my spouse, and I should do this and that, listen to some music and pray, but they don't do it. They think giving them the intellectual affirmation of the concept is all really is required. And we keep hitting home, you have to take these action steps for your own, well-being and to regain a balance in your life. And so that's an important part. But no, it's all pressure driven.
Yeah, and Rabbi Iggy, I noticed on your website that thinking of this sort of it's a daily practice, Dan, as you're saying, you're having these things, and it helps keeping recovery is this kind of constant process. And I'm sure you guys do that, but I also noticed you even have like a separate thing for downloading daily prayers if you want, right, or daily logs or things like that. So what is that kind of, how do you guys work with that sort of, or do you bring traditions in from your own background, maybe from the Jewish tradition or some of these other, AA or other practices? I don't know enough about that kind of constant working on it. And do people need that every day, or they kind of come once a week, or?
So yes. So I would say that that you don't have spirituality. I am not spiritual. I don't have recovery. I practice spirituality. Spirituality is a discipline. Recovery is a discipline, right? It has to be something that I do daily, whatever each person has done, but something that I engage with. And yes, so on the website, there is from daily journaling tools, which is sort of one of our most popular, which is a tool that sort of really helps you create a white canvas behind your life that helps you actually look at what you are needing to do, to groups that we run around what we call Teshuva groups, around how do we make meaning out of the actions we take? How do we know which actions to take? What kind of words we look at it, right? And we look at it through three lenses, which is truth, remorse, and responsibility. But I believe that, and it's not just more than I believe, my experience is that when we want something to be better in our life, when we want change and we want to also then maintain the progress we have to engage with it on a daily basis. And whether this is your diet or your gym or your recovery or your parenting or your writing or your art practice, whatever it is always those people who go back to it on a daily basis, who have a routine around it, that are able to make the change. And that's really important. So we bring stuff from Jewish traditions, from other traditions, from Buddhist traditions, mindfulness traditions, meditation traditions. I've been very fortunate to train with some of the world's most important sort of like gurus and rabbis and imams and teachers to really find ways to help people crystallize things that they can do on a daily basis. I'm very much a vernacular rabbi, right? I really believe in vernacular spirituality. I mean, I'll talk to you about theology and concept theology from here until the cows come home. But really what I'm really passionate about is finding ways to help every single person, right, who doesn't always want to engage with the large question, is there a God? And if so, where they live? But how do I take spirituality and make it a daily thing? That's really where my passion lies. And that's where a lot of the work in recovery lies, because without it, there's very little ways to move forward.
Right. And that's a fundamental point of enlightenment, what Rabbi Iggy just said, because, at the outset of recovery, in my experience, people are reluctant. They're filled with fear, which kind of fuels the reluctance. And they're asking themselves, what do I have to do and how long do I have to do it? And it's kind of like, what is my sentence? What do I, especially in the legal world, that can be it, because oftentimes we deal with folks when they've finished up the criminal process and they're in that mindset. And when we succeed, people get to the point that the rabbi just described, that this isn't, it's not a discrete, separate part of your life. It's an everyday thing. And I make the analogy, and it's hard. We oftentimes have to break through a resistance to organized religion or even to spirituality. And I will say that an addict, and I'm most familiar with that, an alcoholic or a drug addict, when confronted with recovery, is looking for any loophole to get out. So you kind of describe the program, they go, well, I love you, but you're asking me to believe in something I just fundamentally can't believe in. And my thing is stick around, you'll figure it out as you go along, but you get to the point where, it's just a part of your life, and it's a daily part of your life. I make the analogy to physical fitness. I mean, the goal is to get in shape. Okay, how do you do it? You do it by exercising.
Okay.
You reach your goal, then what happens? Do you stop exercising? And by that time, the person who makes that a goal looks forward to it being a part of the day because they like the results, they like what it means to them, and there's no, why do I have to do this question anymore? And that's when you're really at the point that Rabbi's talking about in terms of,
That's interesting. And I know there's traditions in Jewish about following rituals, or like any tradition, and that kind of can lead the mind, and it becomes more spiritual and becomes more part of your life. So I want to pause and focus on each of you sort of individually, if you don't mind. And Dan, let me stay with you, because each of you could have taken a variety of different career paths. And even within your own profession, you could have done a bunch of different things. So, how did you come to the work that you do? What do you love about it? Like, why do you do this every day? And then what do you get frustrated about? So Dan, I'm going to leave
Thank you for that. I mean, I spent 30 some years in Washington, D.C. as a lawyer lobbyist. I know it's a very kind of creative, innovative thing to do in Washington. There are only about 100,000 of us there, but that's how I made my career. I went to law school, clerked for a federal judge, was in a litigation law firm for a while, moved to D.C. and got into the government relations world, as we call it, and did that until the time, the kids were grown, and my wife, Sue, and I moved down full-time to Boca Raton, Florida, about 3 or 4 years ago. And I still did some consulting on my own, and I was on some of the kind of the job boards and stuff, because I was looking for opportunities to present seminars at some of the local universities. And I found a notice 2 years ago in the pandemic, in June of 2020, that this organization, Florida Lawyers Assistance, was looking for a new executive director. And so I was down here kind of to ease into a retirement situation. And, but I answered the call and I thought, you know, who knows, but I sent in my resume and so forth. And the reason I did that, Rachel, is because I'm a recovering alcoholic. And as a young lawyer, you know, I finished a clerkship with a federal judge. I was back in my home state of Iowa. I was practicing litigation work in a law firm. And I was really falling victim to my own alcoholism. I made some professional decisions that I wish I hadn't, but it's all how this thing goes, right? And I lied to the Iowa Supreme Court Commission on Professional Responsibilities about whether I had filed my taxes for the last year. I paid them, but I hadn't filed them. And I didn't want them to know that. That's kind of what was happening in my life, you know? There were things I didn't want people to know that I was doing. And so I lied. And on April 1, 1986, I got a letter from them saying, we understand that the information you provided on your form is at odds with what we hear from. Could you please explain? It was a very benignly worded letter. I knew what it meant. I knew that I had gotten caught. And from the moment that letter touched my hands in April 1, 1986 to today, I haven't had a drop of alcohol. So that was my opportunity for recovery. And getting down here, I just thought, you know, hey, if they're willing to take a look at me, there's nothing more meaningful I could do than to provide an opportunity and to try to help with my story, lawyers who were in my position 35 years ago. And we have 350 contracts now, recovery contracts in play with 350 lawyers who need exactly the kind of help I needed, but it wasn't available. I mean, this organization, it was created the year I reached my crisis in Iowa in 1986. And now every day we get to, provide the hope and the opportunities that it doesn't have to be that bad for everybody. So it was a personal motivation on my part, and it's the most fulfilling thing I've ever done.
That's great. I don't even want to ask the frustration stuff, but maybe we'll do that later, because we could pick up a couple of things about what's going on in the industry and the legal profession and all sorts of other things. Rabbi, thank you for sharing, Dan. Really very brave. Thank you. Rabbi Iggy, what was your, how did you get to doing what you're doing?
For the majority of my life, I didn't know what was going on with me. I suffered trauma as a kid, and while I was always sort of like very clever, too clever for my own good, I never really fit in. I felt outsider for all sorts of different reasons. Later on it became, being, a gay man and sort of like other things. And so like I grew up in a very Jewish Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox family in Belgium, very conservative. And I really didn't fit in, and I was angry, and I ran away a lot. And I ran away from responsibilities. I ran away from people. I ran away from things that I started, and really had a sort of like kind of tumultuous life. And it was only later on when I started working with people in recovery and post-incarceration in Los Angeles that I found that all my troubles, all my travels, all my travails, all my pain started to make meaning, because I was able to relate. I was able to use what I've gone through as a way to help people see that they're not alone, to have more. I started asking myself a question around the stuff that I went through, the traumatic stuff that I went through, which was, what if this was the best thing that ever happened to me? I looked at all the traumas area of my life and asked that question. And when the answers started showing up for me, they really were answers that said, well, now I understand what this feels like, what this looks like. And because I was sort of starting a lot of sort of like theology, and because I'm, you know, coming from a very sort of like academic, sort of like Jewish rabbinical sort of like background, the conversation that I was having with people in recovery became very meaningful, because they related to a lot of the work that I've done on myself, or a lot of the work that I encountered in the world, and also the sense of brokenness that I think that so many of us feel and have so few spaces to talk about, right? There's so few spaces to really bring up the real questions around, like, why am I here, and what is my purpose, and why did I do this stupid thing, and why is my life like this, right? And can I change? Can anybody change? Does my pain have meaning? And I realized that all my history brought me to a place where not only could I actually be part of that conversation, but help people see that they're not alone. And in that sense, I came up with this idea for myself, which is why fit in when you can belong, right? So that fitting in constantly makes you want to be bigger, smaller, fit into somebody else's mode, but belonging means to really bring yourself. And when I was able to bring myself, other people were able to bring themselves. And that program became something that was the most meaningful work I've ever done. And I couldn't not, I can't not do it, right? I cannot do it. I feel blessed and privileged to have a path laid in front of me, and a way to help others as well. So what else am I going to do, you know?
Yeah, no, I get it. I mean, both of you bring obviously your personal stories, and then found a way to execute that through empathy. And luckily there's a professional position that you can do that to help people. So I'm sort of curious about, like, thinking about, you know, looking at the sort of individuals and maybe their families or supporters. And I don't know, when people come to you, like how much you get to know of what else the, you know, group is that they have in their lives or whatever. But, you know, what have you kind of learned or think about what, you know, the individuals could learn or know better about their support and other people? And then what do, if you're in contact with them, other supporters, whether it's an intervention or it's family members or, you know, employers, whatever, what could they know better about the person that maybe they're trying to help? Kind of in your experience. Dan, if you want to start with that, if you've had any thoughts on that. Sure.
You know, I guess what we learn about, you know, about the, if I understand your question, about the person and the persons that we deal with, is that they do, you know, they usually come to us with some sort of professional, problem that has happened to them. So Rabbi Iggy has talked about shame and guilt and remorse a lot along the way. We find it very important to be able to identify that and to provide the opportunity for them to deal with that personally and through identifying with others. Because I think when we find ourselves having these kinds of problems, the tendency is to isolate and to withdraw and to pull back and to not share, right? So what we want to do is the opposite of that. We want to introduce that person to 100 other people just like that person, who have the same profession, who have had the same experience, basically. And then all of a sudden, it's not just me. Hold on. That person is feeling the same way, had the same thing happen to him that I did. Then there becomes this community in recovery. And I think what we work on most of all is the awareness. I think we're getting a lot better as a society, or it's more available in society to understand kind of the behavior signals and the warning signs and stuff that family members or business colleagues can take a look at. And we have hour-long presentations that we go all over the state of Florida to give that address in part that very question. You know, if you see one of your colleagues acting like this, you know, then those are danger signs. Those are red flags. This is when you want, because that person is probably moving into withdrawal and is going to isolate more, hide more, and all that. And oftentimes it gets to a point where the person in pain is dying for a way out, looking for a way out, and they don't know how to get it. So the well-placed expression of concern can totally change someone's experience.
So I assume that sort of the maybe the duality I was thinking of is that helping the individuals know, and particularly in a profession, that their wrongdoing, their addiction, that's not their identity, right? And that some ways to separate that is, I hope to say that they're more than that. And then, but if they're kind of withdrawing and they're probably self-identity, I'm a bad person, right. I assume.
Right.
Right?
And the way it worked for me,
obviously helping people understand that. Yeah.
The way it worked for me, Rachel, when I went through my own personal crisis as a young lawyer, was I was relieved to understand that there was an explanation for what I was going through, and that it wasn't all just me. You know, it was like, oh, okay, great. I just thought I was going crazy. I just thought I couldn't, you know, do the right thing under important circumstances. And I didn't know why, but I found out in recovery, yeah, this is how this works. This is how this happened. I said, okay, now tell me how we go from, you know, I was really anxious and open to find out how to fix that, you know, but left to my own devices, I thought it was me. And how could I explain that to anybody? Because I couldn't even explain it to myself.
Yeah. And when you're educating people from the signs, are you also educating people to know it's not just the signs, but kind of what is going on or possibly going on with people who are exhibiting these signs? Okay.
Yeah, we do. Yeah. We try to give some sort of understanding into addiction, into mental health issues, you know, how depression works, how addiction works, and so forth. And because again, you know, it's been 100 years, really almost 90 years since AA came around. But the prevailing view is these are self-imposed problems, and these are self-created problems. And once you give people enough of a context to understand, you know, a lot of this works like other conditions we know of, like diabetes or cancer or something else, and there's no judgment necessarily attached to those. You know, let's take this in a different light and deal with it, you know, without the stigma and that sort of thing. So, yeah,
okay, that's great. Rabbi, what about you? But what are some of the things you try to get the people you're working with or them to understand, and then maybe the other people, what are you trying to educate others to understand about the people who are going through this?
So first and foremost, that addiction is a family disease. It's a family and society disease. That sort of that it's really important to know that sort of, as John Donne says, no man is an island, and no man is an island in all the different ways. Right, the sort of that we have to think about all the different aspects of one's life. And even if somebody really wants to change and does all the work, and then they have to come back to their family system, to their work systems, and they have to be, right, that person anew, right? And that person anew that says, oh, I'm not drinking anymore. And they have to self-disclose and why, like, oh, I'm not drinking, right? So like you have to constantly be in relation, not just to your own recovery, but the people around you, right? You went away, you had a very successful, you came to Teshuva Center 6 to 9 months, you were very successful, your life is a thing. Now you have to come back to your law firm and explain where you work for 6 to 9 months, right? So even if the law firm, whatever, is really supportive and gives you all the time and you come back, now there's people, right? And you have to be able to address that, to be able to change, right? Because some people are like, hey, you're so fun at the party, come. And you have to say like, hey, I need to do something there. So, and this is true for families, right? In psychology, we call this sort of like IPs, identified patients, right? There's sort of that there's ways constantly to remember that we have to engage with society, because society also constantly pushes addiction on us, right? The pandemic, right? All these different, how many people were like, oh, it's time for quarantine, or like, right, you're not going to the office, you can like drink around lunchtime, or like, right, or people like, oh, let's have this drink, and they bring a martini glass the size of a baby, right? Sort of like we're constantly pushed, even through ritual, Jewish ritual, right? Let's have a little schnapps, let's have a little thing, right? Come for a drink, let's go for drinks, right? We celebrate champagne. We are constantly pushing a lot of these behaviors. And I'm not trying to be the party, right? So like the party naysayer. I'm not trying to be wet blanket. What people should and have fun, and I'm supporting fun in responsible ways. But we always have to think that everything we do is always in relation to somebody else, right? I don't think we've said it before, right? But the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is not recovery. The opposite of addiction is connection. And in that sense, when you are able to see through fellowships like AA or NA or whatever, when you're able to do through programs like dance program, like my program, be like, oh, A, I'm not alone. B, I can recover and I can be successful in what I do doing those things. That's when you get hope, right? And that's where the newcomer and the person who's been in recovery for all these times have to have a space together to say, like, I can imagine myself, 10 years from now, 15 years from now. I know that I'm not alone. I know that I can call a sponsor, a rabbi, a friend around these things. And to always, and I think this is on the, for the 70% people on the call who said they don't know somebody who is an alcoholic or in recovery, to make sure that you create a space for that, right? To sort of say, hey, let's meet up for drinks. It doesn't always have to be the bar. Or like, do we make space for people to really better themselves? Do we ask the questions of like why they're not drinking or why they're not coming or all these things? And because when we do that and we stop thinking about people as a failure of moral character and we start thinking about everybody's dealing with something, we're able to be more compassionate with them, but then in return, we're able to be more compassionate with ourselves.
Beautiful. So I'm mindful of the time, and I want to kind of pose one last question to you both. About you've both mentioned kind of in early beginning, kind of what are some of the disease of society, disease of family, lack of connection, people losing meaning, and all those kinds of things. So what are some of the takeaways that you've learned, some of the wisdom you could share that could help people have happier, more fulfilling lives, whether it's daily practice of something, whatever it may be, takeaways? Dan, you have any thoughts on that you want to share?
Yes, I've concluded myself, and I try to put it into practice personally, that, the keys are doing the small fundamentals well regularly, right? So I'll just give you an example. And this is basically the message that we offer, in a lot of our educational programs and stuff. But say in the pandemic time here, for me, my wife and I have both been home. We start in the morning with a bike ride to watch the sunrise together. We get up early and we do that together. Now, we never did that before the pandemic, but we start the day with that. Then, I attend an AA meeting. I'm 36 years sober and I go to 7 or more meetings a week still. And it's because I get to do everything else because I do that, right? And then it's a work day, and I have a pretty involved day, but we stop at the end of the day and we just take another gentle bike ride. We find riding bikes, my wife and I, it gives us a chance to talk. We're not sitting down, the TV's not on, we're not watching the news. We're kind of getting fresh air and visiting with each other at the end of the day. And I try to get an actual exercise routine in. I try to listen to some music. We try to dance at least once a day, before dinner, and those kind of things. But you know what? Every one of those little things helps me not get too off balance in terms of the fears and the concerns that otherwise can fill that space. As Rabbi said, you're filling a space one way or another. And if it's not with a chemical, it's got to be with something else. And I find that, and it sounds simple and kind of corny, but when we do those things, I'm much more content and I'm less vulnerable to what people experience when their routines get thrown off, like they have in the last couple of years. And that's really the message, to find the fundamental, repeatable practices, action steps, not up here. You got to do it. That will, make it a satisfying day for you. And they can vary with each one, but that's what we all need to do.
That's great. Thank you for sharing, Dan. Rabbi Iggy?
Yeah. It's funny, very similar, but I would say that there are 3 things that you can do on a daily basis to make sure that sort of your life is better, whether you're in recovery or not. One is gratitude. Find a practice of gratitude, right? Whether you want to go Teshuva Center.org and download the gratitude sort of like journaling tool, which is free for people, they can do it. So gratitude, number 1. Find a practice of gratitude. And that is gratitude, not just for like, oh, I have food at my table and a roof over my head, which is important, but like, how do I find gratitude for things that were difficult? What have I learned from my failures? What have I learned from my life? 2, and that is a practice of self-mindfulness. Find a spot, find 5 minutes of solitude for yourself, a place where you can really observe your thoughts. It could be unified mindfulness, it could be meditation, transcendental meditation, prayer, study, whatever it is, but find something that gives you a chance to reflect within yourself. And thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, find a practice of service, of giving, of something to somebody else. Even if you are receiving charity in our tradition, you are commanded to also give charity, because everybody has something to give. Everybody has somebody in their life who has less than them. So if you really practice your own mindfulness, if you practice giving, and if you practice gratitude, those are three, and I cannot sort of stress how much I agree with Dan. If those are actions, not attitudes, if those are actions that you implement in your life on a daily basis, I guarantee your life will become better.
Beautiful. Well, we're at the end of our hour. I'm so grateful for both of you for doing the work that you do and for sharing your stories and your work with us. We will definitely be sharing links and other resources to people. And I want to thank our audience for joining us. And hopefully everybody learned a little something, if not a bit more about the kind of details of addiction and some of this program, but maybe just a couple of takeaways to be on the lookout for things. And also that includes looking out for yourself. So thank you again. Have a wonderful evening. And I wish everybody best of luck and good health in the future. We hope to see you back at another program in the not too distant future.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Rachel, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Have
Rabbi.
a great evening.
Take care.
Bye.